been a trippy day. Two big questions that have come up in podcasts I've been listening to that have reminded me of my philosophy of art, of consciousness, of life. And it's the first time that I've heard the concept that I've been pondering for years about consciousness discussed by someone else, and they've added another spin to it, and that spin is to do with, come on Clover, Basset House, eh? That spin is to do with the fact that we're in a simulation. So that's quite a big statement, it's quite a bold statement. So I'm listening to impact theory. Tom Bilyeu is discussing this concept with Donald Hoffman. And before I listened to that, I listened to London Real, Brian Rose, in discussion with Hugo Degas. Is that his name? I think it's Hugo Degas. Something like that. I'll put the link in the show notes. You can check it out. That was a discussion about AI. And the two kind of go together. Which is to say that Hugo's, his thesis was that AI is going to double and then double again and double again in terms of its consciousness, and it will reach a state where it becomes godlike. And then who's to say that it couldn't create a world like the one we're living in? Which is how we think of God, isn't it? God the Creator. So, is God just an AI? A super intelligence? Now, to get to the simulation part, Donald Hoffman was saying that if we're in a simulation, then what we see is only what's being rendered at the time. So the example they use is like in Grand Theft Auto. So the pixels in the scenes that you're not in are not being rendered by your graphics card because they don't need to be. You're not in that scene. And once you are in it, then it gets rendered. Now, when I think back to, I don't know when I would have been, primary school, I used to imagine, which is a bit of a big concept for a pre-teen to come up with. But I used to imagine that, how did I know my mum and dad were not monsters? And they only looked like my mum and dad when I looked at them. But when I wasn't looking at them, they didn't look like my mum and dad, they looked like monsters. And I was trying to come up with ways of tricking it, so the obvious one, look in the mirror. But no, because I'm still looking at them. And I couldn't come up with any way of looking at them without looking at them, if you see what I mean. So, in that sense, they were being rendered by my consciousness. And so, that concept, I've never heard it really discussed by anyone else before, and now I have. But in a bigger sense, with the idea that it's not just that my mum and dad are monsters, it's that everything around us is simulated, and we only see it when we see it, and when we're not seeing it, it's not actually there. Another thing I think about is when I used to travel a lot and those were good times. I miss travelling in some ways. And the idea that, let's say Odessa, which is a place where I spent a year, and often, still to this day, comes up in my dreams. I imagine that the things that were, well, the people in Odessa are going about their Odessa days, while I'm going about my Aaron day. And it's weird to think that all that stuff's still going on when I'm not there, which is a bit solipsistic, which is a concept I learned about through reading War and Peace. And Prince Andrei is lying next to a fizzing bomb, and he goes through these thoughts about what would happen if he wasn't here, you know. So that's where I learned about solipsism, and it's a concept, a philosophy that I've thought a lot about over the years since I was a student studying War and Peace in 1998. So the AIs, they can become gods, they can create simulated worlds, and we might be in one. So this was on my mind tonight as I walk the dogs. There's a massive concept that Donald Hoffman discusses with Tom. I forget the name of it. It's the idea that consciousness, awareness, I mean, Tom's putting it in a way that I've thought about it, is that consciousness goes into a biological organism, which is our bodies, and it's through those constraints that it learns. I'm not sure what it learns, actually. It's probably a podcast I'm going to have to listen to again. And they also mentioned the fact that they'd had a previous discussion, which I've not heard. So I'll go back and listen to that as well, because this is massive for me, this stuff. It's chickens coming home to roost. It's ideas I've had on my own that I'm now hearing other people discuss, and I've heard two big things in one day on two different podcasts that are kind of aligned. You know, it's a bit freaky. And I'm like, ooh. I forget the name of the concept that he used, which is what I always thought of as a little piece of God, or a little piece of the whole, the one, or the harmony. That's another word I like to use for it. A little piece of the harmony that gets dislocated from the whole and placed inside a biological organism. And that's life, that's your soul. And you get to use that little bit of life energy until you die, and then it goes back to the whole, which is heaven. That's how I've thought about it for years, since I wrote about it in Kazakhstan, actually. Probably drunk. Nevertheless, it's a concept that stuck with me and evolved, and now it's beginning to grow because I'm hearing other people discuss it. So that little piece of God, that little piece of consciousness, that little piece of energy that goes into a biological organism, and it yearns to contact, to connect with other pieces of energy. It's attracted to other pieces of energy. And that's why I believe people say that you're reunited with your loved ones when you get to heaven. Because you are, if what I'm saying turns out to be the case. Because your loved ones who have passed on have gone back into that big energy field, into heaven. They've become God. And when you die, you get to rejoin them, which is a comforting thing. It gives me comfort. I forget the name of that Tom and Donald give to this consciousness. I think it starts with a Q. So I'm going to have to re-listen. I'm not finished it yet, actually. I just came on talk about it a bit while I'm out with the dog, because it's on my mind. So. Yeah, big philosophical thoughts, which, do they put my life into some context? Do you know what? I think they do. And if you're worried about AI, as you probably will be if you listen to whatever that guy's called, somebody to somebody, I've forgotten his name already. I looked it up before I came on because I knew I was going to say it, and now I've forgotten it. As I said, link will be down below. If you listen to that podcast, and I recommend that you do, I would definitely follow it up by listening to Mo Gaudat. Now, Mo has been on with Brian Rose, London Real. They had an amazing discussion last month, end of last month, so very recent, which went into AI and ended up giving me hope rather than fear. And Mo also talked with Tom on impact theory, which is where I first became aware of Mo Gaudat. And it was one of the most enlightening interviews I've ever heard. So, AI, God, simulations, context for life. It's all good stuff. Check it out.